let's get into the layout of this so this video doesn't get extremely long, and then I can break it down into segments for you guys, like I said, if there's a demand. So basically with this system, there's cold water that comes in from my meter over here. Okay, comes in right now, it's coming in about 60 degrees from the street right now. That's probably even a little warm because it's been sitting, there hasn't been any flow, and you know, normally it's a little less than that. Comes in and it splits and it goes two ways. So it comes up to a loop which goes over and it goes into the top of the cold water side of my mana block. Comes down here and feeds all these cold fixtures. It comes out the bottom on the cold side, goes into that bottom copper pipe, the bottom one. That is for my water backup sump pump, which I haven't plumbed in yet, but it's in there. Comes over here, goes to a drain, which will drain into here if I need to drain the whole thing down. Comes in on that bottom line still, turns and tees right here into this, and this side goes back around over here and back into the meter. Okay, so it's basically a continuous pressure balance loop down here. It's all 1-inch copper. Now what I did here is I also made another little pressure balance loop, and this feeds all of my outdoor spigots on the house. So my faucets, like on the driveway, the rear balcony, the irrigation system for the sprinklers, for the grass. And what I do in the winter time, like right now, I shut this off. I shut it off down there so no more water can enter. I open up that valve and run a hose over to the sump pump, and I open all these up. And it drains all the water out of everything. And even though they're frost-free silcocks out there, they can't freeze if there's no water in them. So that's kind of the cold water loop here. Now what happens back here after this T is it comes and it goes into a shut-off valve, okay, around here into a strainer, just to kind of keep any garbage that might come in from the street or anything, which, you know, it's kind of doubtful, but it's a cheap addition. Keeps any crap out of the hot water side of things and get into those tankless. So then it pressure and temperature gauge here so that I can see a little bit of solder, can see what the temperature and pressure is. Then we've got a one-way check valve or swing check valve that goes up to a three-way mixing valve, which goes out to my domestic hot water, and I'll get to that in a second. We have another one here that lets cold water into the hot water system. Okay, and I do have a big drawing of this that I can put up for you guys if it helps, but basically from here, water can get into here and water can get into there, but it can't get back either way. Okay, so once that water comes in through here, now it's into this, I guess, neutral area that I would call it. It's under street pressure, so it's under 55 pounds, and there's a lot of things that can happen here. The water can flow either direction when it's in this section, okay? So, in other words, if there's a call for hot water, okay, the domestic hot water comes out of the tank right here. It goes over back there, it tees off back there, I don't know if you can see that, comes over and goes into the hot side of that three-way mixing valve, okay? And then on the output side, the mixed side, that runs all the way over along that top line, all the way over, up and into my supply for my fixtures. Okay, so if there's a call for hot water right now, if somebody upstairs turns on the hot water, the difference between this system and our old tankless system is normally the tankless hot water heater would fire. It would have to turn on to heat the water. Right now, I have a 20-gallon stainless steel HTP storage tank here, okay? I took the heating element out and I put a aquastat well in there with a temperature probe, and it runs up to this aquastat right here. So what I can do with this aquastat is I can set the temperature that I want this tank to come on, and what I want the differential to be. So in other words, how long do I want that tank to run, that pump, to bring the heat from the tankless units back and recirculate that tank. Okay? And what that does for me is the little calls for hot water, like washing your hands or the dishwasher or the furnace. Our furnace has a whole house humidifier on it that likes hot water better than cold. All of that stuff can operate as it needs, and it's not going to fire the units. The only thing that'll fire the units is when this tank gets below a certain set point. Okay, then that aquastat will turn on that pump. That pump will pump through the tankless units. I'll show you that in a minute. So also, I have a hot water recirculation loop here that goes over to that little pump. So like I mentioned, the hot water travels across the top here, goes up and tees in, and then it can either go to the hot fixtures or it can come down and into this middle copper line here, which goes through that recirculation pump, down, over through here, through this one-way check valve, this way only, and back into my neutral area. So right now, this hot water pump, recirculation pump, like it just kicked on right now. It just sensed that that water is 105 degrees. Okay, and the sensor is right here. Tried to get it as close to this as I could. So as that line, as the hot water in that line cools down to 105, and this aquastat senses that, it turns on this pump. So right now, this pump is sucking hot water from the tank up through here and pushing it back on the recirc line into that neutral zone right there. Okay, and as you'll see, it's already back up to 109, 110, 111, 112. So that keeps the hot water pretty much right here all the time. So when we turn on a fixture, you've got hot water pretty quick. So, but it doesn't turn on the tankless units unless this drops. Now that's at 126, and at 125, it's going to fire the units. So you'll actually get to, okay, just hit 125. So what just happened there is the sensor inside that tank says, hey, the tank's getting a little cold. I need some hot water here. Okay, it turns on this pump, and the pump starts sucking water from the bottom of the hot water tank through this zone, over, through the pump, and into the primary loop. So right now the hot water is going through the flat plate heat exchanger, which I'll explain that in a minute, around, up, into the tankless units, okay, out of the tankless units, over to here, and back in the top of the tank. And right now, since there's no call for hot water, that's just circulating right now, okay? And you can see here that right now we've got 125 degrees coming in. The tank's reading about 123 degrees. So, and we've got 140 degrees going out. And we're flowing about, it should be about 3.8, 3.9, okay, 3.6 gallons a minute through each heater. So, and you can also, we can also put this unit into, basically put it into diagnostic mode here, and I can tell you what the total BTU draw is for the whole system for amongst both units. So right now we're using about 45,000 BTUs, so about 22.5 per unit, to bring that water in that tank from 120, probably 28 by now, 27, 130 to 140. So as the return water increases, because it's heating that tank, my BTU usage drops down. So as you'll see here, these are going to kick off once this aquastat hits 131 degrees, because that's what I set it at. It will shut off that pump and it will shut off the heaters. It takes about 3 minutes for that to occur. And during the normal day when there's no hot water draw, just with the recirc pump running, every, you know, usually that thing runs like for about 30 seconds every, say maybe every hour, every 40 minutes or so, that'll kick on and keep that hot water loop hot. This thing, it really only runs these heaters about once every hour and a half, and at night when I turn off that recirc pump, this setup will go 7 hours and it won't recirc the water in that tank, because it actually takes 7 hours for the water in that tank to drop from 131 to 125. It loses about a degree an hour. It's a very efficient little tank. So, you know, to burn at 45,000 BTUs for 3 minutes, you know, it's nothing. It's very efficient even to do my domestic. So that's the hot water recirc here. You know, it pulls the hot water through the three-way valve over, brings it back, puts it in here. Now, if it was doing that and say the shower was on, okay, now you've got water leaving the system. So say you've got a shower head that's putting out 2.8 gallons a minute. Okay, so what'll happen is at first, you'll have 2.8 gallons a minute of hot water leaving the tank here. You'll have 2.8 gallons a minute of cold water entering the tank here. So it's not going to fire the heaters initially, but eventually the cold water in this tank will start to replace the hot water up to a point where this sensor will drop in temperature and it will kick on the pump, just like it just did. But now, instead of pulling 100% of the, you know, roughly 7.6 gallons a minute that this pump can push through both of these heaters total through, you're pulling 2.8 of it is coming in from the cold side to replace the 2.8 that's going out through the shower head. Okay, and the rest of it is coming from the tank. So you will burn a little bit more BTUs because that water coming in from the street is 55 degrees. It's not 125 degrees like here, but it does mix with it together. And because you're pushing 7.6 total through both units and you're only pulling 2.8 in, you're only using 2.8 out the shower head, the remaining, you know, 4 or 5 gallons a minute comes from the tank. So even with the shower on, the pump will recirculate the tank to a point where it will shut it off. It can catch up. You know, even with, as long as you're not exceeding 7.6 gallons a minute, which would be, you know, 2-3 showers on at the same time, the tank will catch up. The system will eventually beat the use that you're drawing from it. So in other words, you can't run out of hot water, so to speak. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense, but so that's kind of how that part of it works. Now, like I mentioned, on the hot water out, it does tee back there, and it goes out on this hot line over to my furnace, which I have other videos I'll upload of that. And we have an April Air whole house humidifier on the furnace. You know, it pumps humidity into the air in the winter, and they like hot water over cold, even though the one we do have is fully automatic. It has a fan in it, but still, I like to give it that nice hot 130 degree water. So what I did was teed off of here, put it over there. There's a pump just like that Takeo 006 there on the furnace that only runs through relays, and I can take the cover off this box and show you my relays for that, although I might do a separate video just on the electrical part of this. But whenever the furnace is on and it's calling for the humidifier to be on, there's a pump that turns on that will pull hot water from the tank and dump it back in down here on the return back there. So it pushes it again back into this neutral area here. So it is possible that the furnace could be on, recirculating the tank, and the hot water heaters won't be on. It's possible that the hot water recirculation loop, like it just was, could be on, and the heaters won't be on. Okay? You know, again, this is kind of one of the reasons it's possible somebody could be washing their hands, or the dishwasher could be on, and things could be pulling from this tank and the tankless units won't fire. The only thing that will fire them is they see the flow of this pump. So that's kind of this neutral area that I talked about. Okay, so now once you get up here, coming from the heaters, you've got your hot out, reverse return like that, like I talked about. Here's your hot, comes back there. I've got to finish insulating it. This is all 1.5 inches. This is 1 inch, this is 1 inch, the 1 inch goes down, this is all 1 inch back here, and then back here it goes to like a 1.5 by 1.5 by 1 inch T. Okay, goes into 1.5 here, temperature and pressure gauge, comes over, and this is where it tees to feed the hot water tank. This is all 1 inch here, and there's another check valve here so that you can't get water going the wrong way back into the system. Hot water can go in at 140 degrees, but it can't come out up here. Okay, this is just an air vent. Keeps the air, any air that might come in from the street and get into the tank, it bubbles up and it automatically bleeds itself out. So as far as the heater goes, the primary loop that I like to call it, you're basically taking the tank part, the domestic part of it, out of the equation. The primary loop comes down here, turns here, goes through another swing check valve, so the pressure, the street pressure coming in from here cannot go backwards. It has to go through the flat plate heat exchanger. Okay, so all of my hot water then, domestic hot water, comes in through, or cold water I should say, unless you're recirculating, comes in through this side of the flat plate. Now this is a 100 plate copper brazed flat plate heat exchanger. Okay, and I can put some pictures of that in the video, and I can give you guys info on where I bought all this stuff. I built this nice little box, I insulated it, keeps it in there nice and warm, and I don't get a lot of heat loss off that big, because it's a big hunk of copper basically in here that's you know, that's surrounding that thing. So for those of you that don't know what a flat plate heat exchanger is, basically it's a mechanism that lets you heat up two different fluids without them mixing. Okay, because of the snow melt on this, I have to have glycol in the driveway or else it would freeze. Okay, I don't necessarily need it in the staple up in the house, but because this is all on that side of the flat plate, everything has glycol in it over here. Okay, but everything over here does not. This is all domestic hot water pretty much. I shouldn't say everything, because some of these lines are the primary loop for the heating side. But anyway, hot water comes in here, comes out here. When there's no call for heat, the radiant's off, the snow melt's off, it just travels right through. Okay, comes down around. I have a drain and a shut off, so that what I can do is shut it off here. I can shut it off here. I can hook my hoses up here and here, and I can flush this domestic side of that heat exchanger. Just like once a year, you shut these valves off here like this, and you hook up your pump, and you flush these things with vinegar just to keep any buildup or anything out of them. Okay, well, I want to do that on this heat exchanger too. So I designed this with basically a shut-off valve, a drain, same thing down here, so that I can go ahead and flush that out. Come over here, I have my domestic expansion tank. This is a expansion tank on the domestic side. It's meant for domestic. Handles the pressure increase of the system when this water's heated up. My primary loop pump, which this stays off when there's no call for snow melt or radiant heat. This is off. Okay, the water just flows right through it. The water goes into the heaters through the cold, comes out through the hot, and we go back through whatever we're doing. Okay, so if we're heating hot water, it goes right into the tank, comes out of the tank, goes through this pump, up, back in, round and around it goes until that tank is satisfied. Okay, now let's say there's a call for heat or snow melt. All right, because these fluids don't touch, The glycol's on one side of the flat plate. The domestic hot water's on the other side of the flat plate. You need something to turn on the heaters in order to produce the heat. That's where this pump comes in. So whenever there's a call for whether it be radiant heat, snowmelt heat, slab, garage, basement, whatever, these aquastats have the ability to turn on this pump. And they turn on that pump and they pump hot water through this primary loop, round and round and round, okay, until the demand is satisfied. But what's going on the other side, as this hot 140 degree water comes down here, it's not really needed in the tank. It's just going in, out, back to the heaters. Coming out at 140, going in, going out, back to the heaters. But what's going on is on the opposite side of this flat plate, I have cold water, or glycol actually, cold glycol coming in on the bottom, picking up heat, stealing heat from this primary loop, and going out, okay, over here to my radiant stuff. So the water, I keep saying water, the glycol coming out of the radiant outside of this flat plate will come out here with as much heat that it can steal from the primary loop side. So this glycol will be heated, comes out. I have a pressure and relief valve there, which I just plumbed out now so that I could put like a bucket under it when I was filling it. I have a purge valve here, which comes in very handy when you're filling the system. Spirovent, which will take all the air out. It's basically a micro bubbler. So, you know, any little air bubbles that pass through here get caught on these grates and they fizzle up inside here, and then they just bleed out through here. Originally, I had a, I think it's a 5-gallon. It's a EX30 expansion tank, similar to this, that mounted right underneath the Spirovent. And then I realized that since I'm using glycol and I did all the math for all the PEX and how much expansion I'm going to have, I realized I need a bigger tank. So that's a RX60, and it's a red one because it's meant for glycol and radiant heat. Originally I had the gray one, which is meant for just like your normal boiler water that you see in people with boilers, you know, baseboard hot water or whatever. So I bought a little propane valve here and just hooked up my tank. This runs through the stainless steel braided line around the back into the bottom. This is pressurized to 14 pounds, okay, which is what my heating side of the system is at. And on here I just put a gauge on it just to help when I was filling it. So anyway, that primary loop comes out with heated glycol, comes around, goes through the bubbler, shut off valve, comes down underneath here in the front to another fill valve, which I use this one exclusively too. Up here in the front, I have pressure and temperature so I can see what temperature I'm getting to my zones right here. Comes up and then it goes out to each zone. So this first one right here is my staple up. So my staple up needs the hottest water first. Even though all three of these are really going to get the same temperature, it's not like there's no mixing valves here, so they all get whatever they can get, which is usually about 100, and it depends on how many of them are drawing, but it's anywhere from 100 to 130 that flat plate can steal from the primary loop side, which has 140 in it. So anyway, let's say that the staple up manifold here was calling for heat. It would go ahead, the glycol would come up, it would go through this, again, spring-loaded check valve, up through the pump, into the supply, it would come over, come down. This is for future, the rest of my first floor eventually. I want to put radiant heat underneath, so I left a manifold for that. It's all plumbed in, so I don't need to do any of that. I can just hook my PEX up, purge the air out, turn these on, and I'm good to go. Okay, this one's currently hooked up. Go out through the floors, come back through the return. Okay, down. Now the return's in the back. And what I did on these, because now the problem I have is, since any one of these three zones can turn on that pump, What if one of them is calling? What if the Snowmelt's running for hours? You know, which it does. I mean, the Snowmelt could be running for 16 hours. Well, without these valves here, these are three-way valves, you could just be dumping heat and heat and heat and heat into like the staple up. And you don't want that. You don't want your floors, your hardwood floors, to get over 80, 85 degrees. So you can't just dump heat into these rooms that don't need it. You're going to overheat them. You're going to overheat the floors. You're going to overheat the people. It's just not going to be comfortable. So what I came up with was, I read an article by, I think it was Siggy. It's John, it's Sigan. I call him just Siggy. I think that's what most of the people call him. But basically, he came up with a design to use continuous circulation. Okay, so I do not have any thermostats in the house part of things that control the floor heat, okay, or the radiant. So you're probably thinking, well, how are you controlling this without thermostats? Well, I think thermostats would compete with my furnace, with my forced air, because the air right now in my bedrooms up there is 68, 69, 70 degrees. So unless I'm turning them way up to get the floors warm, a thermostat, unless I put a slab or a floor sensor in, which Tecmar and them, they do make those, but I don't have any of those. Unless I do all of that, really, the thermostats are going to be fighting with my forced air furnace. So the article I read came up with this whole concept of continuous circulation. And what you do is, whenever the radiant is on, okay, these pumps run nonstop. They run continuous. Now, these are Delta T pumps. They're these Viridian VT 2218 pumps. So I set the Delta T I want on them, which for the staple up, it's like 10 degrees, and for the slabs, it's like 20. And they will just continuously pump glycol through the floors. Okay? As that glycol cools down to whatever temperature I set on these aquastats, it gets to the certain point where it says, hey, I need more heat. The aquastat will then energize, and it does two things. It opens up this three-way valve and allows the glycol to now go straight through and down and through the return, which I'll show you, pick up more heat and come back out the loop that we just made and back to the supply. So it'll do that. So now 130 degrees is going out to the rooms, okay? These pumps will try to maintain whatever delta T you set them at. So if I have this pump set to a 10 degree delta T, it will try to keep the glycol flowing at that delta T or underneath. And as that delta T closes, the pump will actually slow down because they're ECM variable speed pumps. Very efficient. So what happens is once that glycol cools to, you know, for this, I believe it gets down to like 90 degrees, the aquastat kicks on, it opens up this valve, it turns on the primary loop pump, the heaters come on, it start picking up heat. I now have 120, 130 degree glycol going out to the floors. This pump sees that the supply is 130, but the return is only 80, and says, oh, better get moving. The pump starts pumping faster and faster and faster, uses more energy, but it starts pushing this heat through the loops, through the house, until the return comes up to whatever set point I have all of this at. Okay, which here I believe it's 90. Once it hits 90 degrees, it says, oh, okay, I'm satisfied. The aquastat turns off. It closes this three-way valve so that now, instead of the glycol going back to get more heat, the glycol bypasses and comes back into this loop. And because these are on all the time, it just keeps pumping and pumping and pumping through the floors. And that's called continuous circulation. And what it does is it really evens out the heat. You don't get hot spots, you don't get cold spots, especially in the slabs, like the basement and the garage. If there's areas that you might be a little bit light on PEX, or it's at the end of your serpentine. If you did a serpentine pattern, you know, towards the end, it can get a little cooler. It really evens all that heat out. And we've noticed it here. Everything is just comfortable. The floors are just comfortable. There's no cold spots. There's no hot spots. It's just a nice, even heat everywhere. And I'm not even using the radiant to heat primarily. We're just using it to warm the floors, to take the edge off the floors. But you can feel it. You know, when the floors are 80 degrees, it's comfortable on your feet. You can feel it. So that's basically what these two zones do. Same exact thing for the slabs here. Same setup, same aquastat setup, same three-way valve setup, pump setup, everything. So whenever I turn on this radiant switch right here, which can be controlled from my smartphone, which the radiant one is not so much that important. The radiant one basically, you know, you turn it on in the fall, and typically you leave it on, you know, if you want the floors warm. Now I have it off now so that I can talk and I don't have to talk over everything. But yeah, basically, you know, I leave it on, it does all of this, and it's good to go. Like, you don't mess with it. Now the Snowmelt, I turn on and off also from my smartphone. It does a very similar thing. It turns on this pump, and this pump stays on all the time as long as the Snowmelt is on. That Takeo 13 is pumping glycol through the driveway. Okay? Same exact concept. When that glycol, and right now I have the aquastat set to 80 degrees. So when the return glycol coming back from the driveway gets to 80 degrees, it shuts off the primary pump. Okay? But the driveway's still circulating, and I have that on a 15-degree differential right now. So it pumps that 80-degree glycol round and round until it loses heat. It drops to 79, 78, 77. It gets all the way down to 65 and says, I need more heat. Once it hits 65, the aquastat energizes. It opens the three-way valve to now allow glycol to go down through the return. It energizes this pump, turns on the heaters, and starts to pick up more heat for the driveway. Once it heats it back up to 80, it turns it off. So it's very efficient in that it's not running non-stop. Even when you're melting the driveway, the system is really, it'll even out. Once it's been on a couple of hours, it evens out to where it's like on for, it's on, I'd have to go back and look at the logs, but it's like on 11 minutes, off for 12, on 11, off for 12, or sometimes it's like on for 10, off for 13. It all depends on how warm it is outside, how cold it is outside, you know, all of that sort of stuff. But basically you're only really running the heaters for like, I don't know, 20 minutes, 25 minutes out of the hour. The other 35 minutes, you're just running that pump to circulate the glycol. And all you're trying to do is get that slab above 32. I mean, ideally you want it like 40, 45 degrees. Okay, some will say 38, some will say 45. It all depends. For me, so far, I've noticed mine's right about 40, 45 degrees. I like that. Seems to do well melting the snow. It seems to keep up with a decent snow. It can't keep up with a heavy lake effect snow like you saw in the one time lapse. But, you know, it does okay for the most part. So you don't need to be constantly dumping 130 degree water through this for hours and hours and hours on end and bringing the surface temperature of the driveway up to like 60 or 70 degrees when bringing it up to 45 will melt the snow and dry the slab just as well. And it'll do it very efficiently. So, you know, so far, I like the setting of 80. That's what I have mine set to, and it just cycles. It cycles like clockwork. So it's firing these heaters twice an hour, you know, sometimes 3 times an hour for about 10 minutes each. And that's it. It comes on, fires them up, adds more heat. Glycol comes back hot, aquastat's satisfied, three-way valve closes. Now the glycol is just circulating itself out through the loops, back, just keeps going, done. So Yeah, I can do. I'll do another video on the controls and the relays that are in there, and I'll show all that because this one's getting long. I just wanted to show you guys the piping on this one. So then, from the returns, when the system is on, when the zone is on and calling, the cool glycol comes down through the return of each zone into the return header. I do have purge valves here. Okay, so, and I did use these to purge. So, basically, you can use them to, purge the system or whatever, and comes down back here through the return 1.5 inches, which is in the back here. I have another fill and purge valve. Comes around the bottom there, does a 180, and comes into the input side or the cold side of the flat plate, picks up more heat, and goes out and starts the same loop all over again. So another note for the flat plate heat exchanger, you want these flowing in opposite directions. And what I mean is, if you've got your heat from the hot water heaters on the domestic side coming in here at 140 and going out cooler, you want your cold water coming in on the bottom and flowing opposite direction to pick up the heat as it crosses it. And as the water flows opposite ways in the flat plate, it's more efficient that way. It picks up more heat than having them both go in the same side and out. So they're bypassing each other like cars on a highway, versus riding next to each other, sort of thing. So this is picking up heat as it travels. This glycol is picking up heat as it goes this way. This domestic is losing heat as it goes this way. Okay, so that's basically how the system works, guys. It looks complicated. It's really not. Once you get it all set up and dialed in, it runs itself. I can be at work on my phone, take my phone out, look at the cameras, say, oh, looks like there's getting snow on the driveway, go into the Smart Things app, turn on this light switch, that'll energize, turn on everything remotely, the pump comes on, the aquastat comes on. Obviously, if you turned it on right now, it's going to be below 80, and it's going to fire, start circulating the driveway. The heaters will come on. Initially, you're going to get a hard hit. You're going to use 300+ thousand BTUs because you've got 20-degree glycol coming back. But it's short-lived. Within 15-20 minutes, you're up to 60 degrees coming back. And the BTUs drops. So, within an hour, you're up in the 70s and you're using, I don't want to say you're using nothing. You're using something because you're dumping BTUs out to the driveway, but you're using 175, 180,000 BTUs. It's really not. You could get away with one unit.